Good morning. My name is Estefi Valenzuela, and I recently obtained my PhD in Arabic linguistics from the University of Texas at Austin. First of all, I wanted to thank the organizers for making the 2020 Aleph conference possible this year under such exceptional circumstances. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm very glad that you could hold us on this platform, and I look forward to seeing other presentations and hearing your comments and feedback about mine. Today I will be speaking about non-standard written practices in Andlausi and Maghrebi medieval texts. First, I will introduce the motivations of this study and explain the methodology followed, and then I will proceed to present my study. In the history of pre-modern written Arabic, it is fairly common to encounter different versions of a given text that exhibit a great deal of variation in terms of the contents covered and also the language employed. The traditional approach to deal with the variation expressed in Arabic written texts has consisted in editing the original sources to create homogeneous versions, based on the premises of eliminating differences and correcting the language. However, some scholars have pointed out the negative impact that the conventional practice of editing early and medieval texts has had for our understanding of pre-modern Arabic-speaking societies. Montgomery 2006 claims that the elimination of differences is not only a distortion, but also an impoverishment of the multiplicity of the early medieval world. From a language perspective, Brustad 2017 argues that the tradition of adapting the language of the manuscripts to fit a specific norm prior publication since the late 19th, early 20th century has promoted the erasure of language variation that might have existed in pre-modern times. Lentin 2011 also notes that many texts written by Muslim authors are studied in artificially normalized editions, not through the original documents, which might have resulted in the misrepresentation of writing practices within this community. In my study, I explore a methodology grounded on a close rereading of medieval sources as an alternative approach to shed some light into the history of written Arabic, particularly that of the Islamic West. For that, I conduct a linguistic analysis of a group of pre-modern Andlausi and Maghrebi manuscripts with the goal to identify patterns that could possibly reveal linguistic variation related to non-standard and/or local uses that was eliminated in the normalized versions and editions of the text. I follow a comparative method in which I study multiple versions of the same work produced by different hands. And I do that as an attempt to account for the potential linguistic diversity introduced by scribes. The study. I examined 7 original manuscripts that deal with the subject of Hisba, or urban market regulations. This happens in 3 main cities of Al-Andalus, Córdoba, Sevilla, and Málaga. These texts are copies of works originally composed between the 10th and 13th century CE by 3 Andalusi authors, Abd al-Rauf, Ibn Abdun, and As-Saqati. The Hisba books were reference manuals written for the use of the local market inspector, Muhtasib or Sahib al-Suq in Arabic. Constable 1996 explains that the Muhtasib was entrusted with the tasks of overseeing the marketplace, supervising baths, hostels, and other public places, and maintaining public decency and religious decorum. These manuals are composed in the form of a collection of professional guidelines oriented to future muhtasibun. They contain detailed accounts of the responsibilities that the muhtasib perform on a daily basis in his role as supervisor of the market. These include the muhtasib's interest in the activity of different groups of traders, merchants, shopkeepers, and guilds, a description of the most common frauds and wrongdoings that took place in the marketplace, the development of a sophisticated system for crime detection, and also the application of sanctions proportional to the infraction committed. The 7 documents analyzed here belong to the collections held in the Egyptian Institute of Islamic Studies in Madrid, the National Library of the Kingdom of Morocco, the DNRM, in Rabat, and the Library of Al-Qarawiyyin, located in Fez. Overall, the original Hisba documents are written in a formal register that complies with the rules of classical Arabic for the most part, although that changes slightly from one book to another. The analysis of this corpus reveals that the language in these texts shows a creative interplay between classical, non-standard, and local features that results in the construction of a more functional register that allows the writer to convey specific meanings. I adopt the term layered texts to denote this type of variation, since the alternation of linguistic forms is not random. Instead, it appears to be motivated by pragmatic and semantic factors. In order to illustrate the type of language variation found in my corpus, I discussed the non-standard expression of verbal moods in the Andlausi Hisba books. There are 2 reasons why I chose to talk about this feature in my presentation. First, the broad distribution of the examples. I found similar functions associated with the use of verbal inflections across the corpus. The second reason has to do with the claims sustained by some scholars such as Hopkins, Blau, and Wagner that the moods disappeared in certain written varieties of Arabic that were not fully composed, or that they are not fully composed in the classical variety. Specifically, their studies deal with early papyri and Christian and Judeo-Arabic texts. In their view, the classical mood endings un and u became to be employed indistinctively in this type of documents. That is, they were mere variants. However, my results indicate that the expression of modality in the Hisba corpus is not always confined to the grammatical constraints of classical Arabic, and that certain non-standard usages of the verbal inflections in the Hisba corpus can be actually explained on semantic and pragmatic grounds. Here, I focus on 2 distinctive functions identified in the Hisba books. The usage of the verbal ending u with verbs of duty and obligation, and un as a marker of future intentive actions. For the sake of time and space, I will be discussing only some of the most representative examples that I identify in my study. The 2 earliest Hisba manuals of Al-Andalus, those of Abd-Rauf and Ibn Abdun, exhibit a systematic use of the verbal inflection hu to mark the jaziv mood without any of the mandatory devices of classical Arabic. This tendency is consistently shown with verbs that express commands, prohibitions, obligations, and duty. In example 1 from Abd-Rauf's manual, the imperfective verb ya'mur, to order, takes the verbal ending hu as it introduces a new sentence, a context that would require the indicative inflection within the standard variety classical Arabic. As we can see, both copies of the book show the same verbal ending. Very similarly, the manual of Ibn Abdun presents a series of verbs that should take the indicative marker based on the classical rules, but instead they show the inflection used to signal the subjunctive and jaziv moods in classical Arabic. In addition to the verb ya'mur, to order, we also find the verb yanhi, to ban, in example number 2. In this case, ya'mur follows the subject of the sentence, and the verb yanhi introduces a new one. The last example of this moral function includes the verbs يؤدب, to discipline, and يغرم, to impose a fine. Just like in the other examples, the same inflection is found in both versions of the manual, which indicates that this type of linguistic variation is not introduced by the scribe. To wrap up this section, we've seen that the two earliest Andalusi Hesba manuals exhibit a recurrent use of the verbal inflection u in contexts that call for the indicative mood un in classical Arabic. This tendency is consistent with verbs that express commands, prohibitions, obligations, and duty. There are a total of 5 verbs that seem to perform this function in the books of Abd and Ibn Abdun. The verb yanhi, to ban, ya'mur, to order, yamnaha, to prevent, yu'addab, to discipline, and yugharrim, to impose a fine. Therefore, it seems that the semantic property of obligatoriness and authority embedded in the lexical meaning of these verbs attracts the u inflection as a non-standard usage of the Joseph mood. The use of the Joseph inflection in this type of construction is not absolute, and there are many other instances in the manuals of Abd al-Rauf and Ibn Abdun in which the same verbs exhibit the un ending, also in initial position in the same type of contexts. Nevertheless, the fact that a semantically homogeneous group of verbs receive special marking in a specific construction should not be dismissed, since it points to a functional use of the u ending motivated by semantic and pragmatic reasons rather than grammatical constraints. As I already mentioned, the Hizba manuscripts follow the formal distinction of mode codified for classical Arabic. But in addition, they also incorporate less rigid variations of the use of verbal morphology, in a way that resonates to a large extent with the dialectal system, inasmuch as the writer seems to maintain a higher degree of control in the choice of mood marking. One of these original functions is performed by the verbal ending un in contexts where the writer indicates the intention of the agent in events that have not yet taken place. There are two particular constructions that favor the introduction of un with this value of future intentive mood in the Hizba books from Al-Andalus. The first one is with al-fa as-sababiyya, also known as the particle of cause, which is governed by the subjunctive mood in classical Arabic, and the second one occurs with the conjunction thumma, then, when it appears in coordination with a verb in the subjunctive. In classical Arabic, the particle of cause, fa, al-fa as-sababiyya, is followed by a verb in the subjunctive when it has a resultative meaning. However, in my corpus, the classical indicative marker un can appear sometimes with a resultative value after the preposition fa. In each case, the marked event expresses a reprehensible action that a specific group of merchants or traders is suspected of performing in the marketplace. In example 4, Ibn Abdun explains, actually rules, that the judge should keep an eye on the agents in charge of applying the correct prices, since they are not to be trusted with the property of others. The resultative sentence فَيَأْكُلُونَ أَمْوَالَ النَّاسِ, so they can illegally seize the property of others, follows the command of to not decide anything without the judge's consent. In the following example from As-Saqati, bread sellers are mentioned in relation to an intended future event that involves deceptive practices. As-Saqati rules that Muhtasib should not delegate the task of getting rid of defective bread and adulterated liquids to avoid bread vendors from bribing his helpers in order not to dispose all the faulty products. The imperfective verbs yaksir, to break something, and yarmi, to throw aside, to discard, take the marked inflection un, although syntactically the subjunctive ending hu would be required in both cases according to the rules of classical Arabic. Marking intentive future moods with the verbal ending un is also found in the book of Abderraouf. More particularly, the two surviving manuscripts of this manual reveal a construction in which the particle thumma then, in coordinating position, signals the intended goal of a given action. Once again, resultative un highlights a reprehensible behavior displayed by professional guilds that operate in the local market. In example 6, this function is illustrated by the unexpected classical indicative mood inflection of the verb yashtarun after the coordinating particle thumma, when the previous verb yabi'u is conjugated in the subjunctive form. This example nicely illustrates the notion of layered texts that I introduced before. On the one hand, we find a formal marker of mood, the particle am, that characterizes the standardized variety of the language, classical Arabic. And on the other, we have a non-standard use of the verbal inflection that seems to attach a future intentive modal value. The fact that the same exact structure appears twice in the book of Abderraouf suggests that this sophisticated manipulation of language forms cannot be attributed to an accidental coincidence. In sum, I have illustrated the function of the verbal ending un to indicate the wrongful intention of the agent in events that have not yet taken place, in contexts where the classical rules require the subjunctive inflection u. This usage appears in the three Andlausi manuals with resultative particles. After the preposition fa, al-fa as-sababiyya in the books of Ibn Abdun and As-Saqati, and after the conjunction thumma, then, in the book of Abderraouf. What is interesting about this specific function is that similar cases have been reported in other non-standard written varieties of Arabic. That is the case for a group of Levantine written texts from the 16th to the 18th century CE, studied by Lenting, 1997. Lenting reports the use of un in intentive future sentences with verbs or expressions of will, duty, etc. Although he does not provide the contexts in which these cases occur, his examples are very similar to my data. This finding supports the theory that the un ending could operate as a resultative marker in certain varieties of written Arabic. But most importantly, it opens a path of exciting possibilities for the study of modality in non-standard varieties of Arabic, since it suggests the existence of patterns in the use of verbal morphology to convey specific modal meanings. To conclude, in this presentation, I have illustrated two distinctive functions of the classical mood morphology in original contexts. The verbal ending wu to express the jussive mood with verbs of obligation and duty, and un as a marker of future intentive moods in sentences that anticipate the reprehensible goal of a given action. The articulation of certain modal meanings in the Andlausi Hispa manuals appears to be conditioned by semantic and pragmatic factors, not grammatical ones. The original functions discussed in this study are completely independent from the grammatical rules that restrict the use of moods to a few morphosyntactic environments determined by a set of fixed particles in classical Arabic. The results obtained from a contextualized reading of my data challenges the claim that non-standard written varieties of Arabic do not have moods. The parallel function of un identified in the Hispa documents and in Lenting's corpus of Levantine texts suggests that the classical indicative inflection could operate as a resultative marker in certain varieties of written Arabic, and more importantly, it establishes a link between pre-modern written varieties in the East and the West. Finally, The same type of variation regarding the non-standard functions of mood appears in all the surviving copies of the Andalusi Hesba books raises many questions about the role of scribes in the process of the transmission of knowledge. Scribes appear to receive and duplicate certain linguistic forms without necessarily modifying or correcting them. Then perhaps we should start considering scribes as crucial agents in the transmission of linguistic features that can help us gain insight about the history of written varieties of Arabic. Thank you very much for attending my presentation. I look forward to hearing any comments, feedback, or suggestions that you might have. Thank you again and have a good day. Bye bye.